Mike is a happily married man with 4 children, 9 grandchildren. He taught and coached in the public school system for 36 years and now is retired. And he fills his time with family, travel, and volunteer work. Since childhood, Mike has always sensed something bigger than himself. As he grew, he began to realize he was in error with some of his thinking because he once thought God was a system of reward and punishment. And his experience said that we are all connected in spirit. And even if one person is hurting, we are all hurting because in our deeper nature, we are all one with God. The most important ways of being with each other is to show that every life matters. Mike takes this truth, quote, that every life matters, unquote, into his volunteer work with elderly care, the poor, and the criminal justice system. So let's welcome Mike McKinney, who will share a meditation and a life lesson.
This morning, the topic is community, and there is a lot to talk about regarding community, but for the purposes of this meditation, I want to talk about inclusiveness, including people that feel left out. And it might be you, but people that are lonely, people that maybe lost somebody, maybe they're in a nursing home, in prison, maybe they're new to the community or to the church, but for whatever reason, there are people that are lonely. And I would like for you to think of someone, whether it's you or somebody else, as we practice Tonglen this morning. There's 4 steps to it. First step is that we clear our mind as best we can by taking deep cleansing breaths. The second step is that we feel physically what it must be like to be lonely. The physical feeling of it, maybe even the colors that come to your mind. The third is to breathe in that feeling. Breathe in the feeling of desperation, heaviness, darkness, whatever that is for you. And then breathe out what you think is needed to overcome that. Whether it's a feeling of peace, whether it's a sunshine, companionship, joy, whatever that is to overcome the loneliness. And the fourth step is to then breathe that out, not only for the person you're thinking about, but for the world, because we are all one. And it is not in our will that anyone be lonely. So take a moment and think about somebody, whether it's you or somebody else, that may be experiencing loneliness today. And now take some cleansing breaths. Try to clear your mind. Try to imagine or experience the colors, the weight, the texture of what it must feel like to be lonely and alone. Now breathe in that feeling and breathe out what you think would help break those walls down, get that person past this feeling of loneliness and isolation. Continue to breathe that in, the feeling of what it must be like to be like in someone in that situation. But now breathe out for the entire world what you think would be helpful. Thank you, loving God. Help us to feel what others feel, to care about their loneliness, to do what we can to make sure that everyone knows that they matter and that they're not alone, and neither are we. We thank you for this time. Amen. I want to talk today about the idea of community, what it means to you to be in community, what is your commitment to it. How does community help us to find peace with God and with one another? And I really liked that lesson, Dan, that you just gave. Yeah, you gave a couple of things. I wish I had written it down, but the idea of excitement. How does community excite you? And the idea of oneness that is brought up in your opening statements, that we're all one, and that we need to be excited about being all one. In the last few months, I've talked a couple of times here. One of the times was on the importance that I found through experience of letting everybody know that their life matters. It was something that I could know in my head, but through experience, I've been able to get that in my heart more. And the importance of listening, the importance of hearing one another. One of the things that I say a lot now to myself and remind myself often is that the more we listen, the less we fear. And the less we fear, the more we trust. And the more we trust, the more we can open ourselves to each other in love. Listening is an important experience. And this week, I'd like to talk about the importance of community, what that does for us in terms of oneness. And it's always a topic like this, it's always kind of hard to decide what piece of it to talk about, because really this could be written in books. There could be many, many, many talks on this issue. So I'm going to talk about not so much the nature of community, not so much why it works in a universal sense, but more of the nurture behind it, how it works for us. What can we experience through community with one another? And there will be time to talk about the other pieces as we go on. But I want to share a story with you. And it's very possibly one of the first experiences that I had in which I could put feelings to community. And it was when I was probably 11 or 12 years old, just a boy. And I had gone through Cub Scouts, and my dad thought that was really important, and it meant a lot to him. And so I took the next step of going into Boy Scouts. Cub Scouts, we were in dens of about 5 or 6, but in this Boy Scout experience, we were put all in one big gym, all the dens from across the city. And there were probably 50 or 60 of us, and we'd sit on the gym floor. There'd be men, leaders, around the outsides of the gym, and there'd be a scoutmaster up in front, sitting on a chair. They did things that I don't remember what they did. I only remember one experience from this. That is that the scoutmaster would sit in front, and he would think of some rhythm, and he would clap his hands to this rhythm, just some kind of thing. We would have to memorize this rhythm. So 50 of us sitting in the gym would do the clapping along with him. And then all of a sudden he'd stop. The men, and maybe women, I don't remember, around the outside would look to see if any of the boys did not stop when he did. Those of us that did not stop clapping when he stopped were taken up front, bent over, and he had a paddle, which in my memory had holes in it so that he could whip it a little quicker, and he'd smack them right on the rump. Hard. They'd move. Well, I didn't like that, and I was fairly astute. So the next time he did it, I just pretended I was clapping my hands. I came as close as I could without actually making my hands meet. I don't know if I stopped when he stopped or not, but I do know the leaders didn't hear me clap because I wasn't clapping. The boys would all cheer, they'd hoot and holler, and somebody would go up front, and somebody else would get smacked with a paddle. And then the boys would all start laughing again, all but one, because I didn't think it was too funny. I lasted 2 meetings of that, in spite of, I know my dad wanted me to go through it. And I never did tell my parents, because that was in the age where adults are never wrong. But I quit. And I learned a couple of things about community that night. One thing that I learned is these people are nuts. I didn't want anything to do with it. I can't imagine why that continued. And the other thing that I was able to put words to that. But the other thing that maybe I didn't put words to until a little bit later in life is there's a cost to community. And sometimes it's dangerous. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it's dangerous physically, but it can be dangerous because we make ourselves vulnerable when we become part of community. And I think the reason that it becomes dangerous is because we don't all enter community with the same spirit. Often we enter it with an agenda. What's going to work for me here, instead of what's going to work for all of us. Community, if it works the way I think it should work, should be a place of safety. It should be a place where we can gather and know that we're being accepted just for who we are, and that we will accept one another for who they are. It's not a place of judgment. Another piece of it is it's a place where we can be heard. Not only a place where we can be heard, but a place where we can hear one another. And that really grows into the sense of oneness. That we can hear one another, that we can be heard. In many groups that I'm in, there's someone who does the talking. A lot of it. Sometimes that might be me, so I withhold judgment. But when that happens, I have to question, what is the agenda here? What are they after? And if it's me doing that, what am I after? And the other piece of that is, how about the people that never talk at all? And oftentimes that's me. What is my purpose here? What is my agenda? A third piece for me, if community works as it should, is the idea of inclusiveness, which follows along with heard and being heard. It doesn't mean that you include every single person that wants to be a part. There is something about numbers that it can be too big or it can be too small. But are we looking to involve all the people that are there? Do we notice when they're sitting there quietly? Do we notice when they seem to be hurting or if they have something that they want to say? Are we invitational to them when they do speak? Are we inviting them to go deeper? That's all a part of inclusiveness. Are we a people who care about one another? It's part of community, caring about one another. Do we allow community to help us to continually reflect on our reasons? It's what I had just spoke about, our agenda, our reasons for being there. Is it for what we will get? Are we infusing love into this community that we're in so that we care about what each other's getting, so that we care about that oneness, that sense of oneness? And oneness isn't gained, I don't think, when it's all about me. And it's not gained when it's all about you. It's gained when it becomes about all of us. And then finally, and maybe most importantly, is it a place where we get this sense of peace? A sense of peace in that oneness with God, with ourselves, and with one another. And can we look and see that others are possibly getting that same thing? I want to share with you another story. This is 2 high schools. One of them is Vanguard College Prep School in Texas, in Waco, Texas. And the other is the Gainesville Tornadoes. These 2 schools have a basketball game that they're going to play. Waco, the Vanguard Prep School, against the Gainesville Tornadoes. They're going to play this basketball game. A couple of the boys from Vanguard decide they don't want to play this game against the other school. And when I first read about this, I thought, why in the world not? Well, the Gainesville Tornadoes were a juvenile detention facility for high school students that had a felony record. They didn't have much of a basketball team, and you had to earn points in this juvenile detention facility in order to even play basketball that week. So the team changed based on who earned enough points to play on that team. They had no home games. Nobody wanted to go into the detention facility and play on that basketball court. So the Gainesville Tornadoes, every game was an away game. And there was only one time in all those away games where even one parent of these kids showed up. Only one time. That parent never showed up again, and no other parents ever showed up all year long. So not only was it an away game, but they had no support for them. So the boys for the Vanguard, 2 of the boys, decided, I don't want to play a game against a team that has no crowd. So what they did was they asked the student body of their own school to divide in half. And half of them would root for Vanguard, the other half would root for Gainesville. They asked the parents to do the same thing. Half of them rooting for one school, half of them rooting for these kids. They spent the week making posters and banners, some for Vanguard, some for Gainesville. And they put them up. I don't know if they had cheerleaders or not, but if they did, I know that they would have divided that too. So the Gainesville Tornadoes now come into the gym, and the crowd's going wild. They have all these people cheering for them. They're looking at the banners that have their names on it. This is a beautiful thing. By the end of the game, as I understand it, the whole crowd was rooting for Gainesville. Who in the world knows what the score was? Who cares? Probably Vanguard won, but who cares? These Gainesville Tornado kids said that was an experience that changed their life, to have somebody that rooted for them. Now, I can't imagine in my life not having somebody that roots for me. I can't imagine that. And yet I see it all the time, especially when I was a teacher. There weren't many people rooting for some of these kids. So I wonder about this experience of this basketball game. I almost called up that school a year or two ago. This happened 5 or 6 years ago, but I got the number of Vanguard Prep School, and I had my finger on the dial of the phone. I was going to call them and say, can you tell me how that might have changed anybody that was involved there? I decided not to go ahead with a phone call, but my imagination is that the kids that did this, that set this all up, started from a place of holiness, of love. At somewhere in there, it might have turned to look what we're doing. It might have turned to a little bit of selfishness in that sense. Look what we're doing, aren't we being special here? But that it turned back to this feeling of holiness then, of this holy love towards these kids when the Vanguard kids saw the reaction of the Gainesville kids. It's an experience that you can't deny. It's an experience of oneness that's there, that changes you. And I think of the experience of the parents and of the teachers. I'm guessing that they bought into the whole thing. I know that they did. But were they taught something by their own children? It's not something, an idea the parents came up with. It's an idea the kids came up with. The kids led by example. And I'm guessing that the parents carried that on. The things that we learn from one another. And then the Gainesville players. I know from experience that when people are incarcerated and they have somebody that cares about them, that they can look on what's real, what's outside those walls. When they can experience love and support, it changes them. It gives them a sense of value. It brings to them the beginnings of something that's peaceful. And I do know from further research that other organizations then took that model of helping people in that facility, took that model and gave them opportunities when they came out. Now compare the two experiences that I'm talking about. The one with the Boy Scouts, the one with the basketball game. Both experiences were an attempt to have community. Both experiences were an attempt to bring people together. But they're so vastly different. And we can hold that first experience in judgment if we want to. I did for many years. How could these people have been like that? How could they do that? How could the men standing around have allowed that to happen week after week after week? And how many of us kids were so scared that we didn't want to go back home and talk to our parents about it. And I do remember that was a piece of my fear, because I didn't want to get it worse when we came back. But how many of us do that same thing in some sense? How many of us are involved in community which we've set down the guidelines, and if someone breaks those guidelines, they're not welcome anymore. They're frozen out somehow. There's a wall that we build up. When we did the practice of Tonglen, that's literally what my thought was, that those people that are lonely and isolated are behind a brick wall. And that when I'm breathing that in, I think of the brick wall and my feeling of claustrophobia. And when I breathed out, it was blowing those bricks down, letting the sunshine come in. But how often when we're in community do we isolate one another? So before I hold those people in judgment, I need to stop and think, how do I do that? But then the second experience of the basketball game, that's just beautiful. That's providing a place of safety. It's providing a place for people to be heard, potentially. It's providing oneness, where we are one with people that are feeling on the outside. What's not beautiful about all of that? And so I want to challenge you, and I'm going to ask you this in you statements. I know that we're taught to think I should be saying I or we, but sometimes when I hear a speaker say, I'm thinking this, it lets me off the hook. When a person says, I have to stop and think, am I providing safety? Am I providing a place for people to be heard? As a listener, it lets me off the hook because I can think, yeah, are you? But when people say, Mike, are you doing it? It makes me stop and think, am I doing it? So I want to ask you, in the communities that you're involved with, are you providing a place of safety for the others that are there, for the people that are new? Are you providing a place for people to be heard? And are you taking the opportunity for yourself to be heard? Are you being inclusive? Are you looking for people that are on the outside? They might be in the walls, on the right side of the walls, but that doesn't mean there's not a wall between you and them that you're not seeing. Are you reflecting on your motives so that you're looking and seeing, is this group about me, or is it about bringing love? And in what ways are you looking to bring oneness to that? Between you and them, between you and God. A sense of oneness. So I'll stop with the same questions that I started with, basically. Do you feel that community is worthwhile? And what do you mean by that? I hope the answer is yes, that community is worthwhile. And I hope the answer is that we'll each make a commitment to it.
In this world, because we don't show ourselves, because it's not safe to be vulnerable to what's really going on inside of us. It's kind of a little bit like, in some ways, your experience with as a Boy Scout or a Cub Scout, where everyone was just playing along and maybe believing it was funny, but it wasn't really funny. So there was this masking that goes on. And I think we get so used to the masking that we forget what community really is, and we forget ourselves. And it is a difficult thing to find people who understand what that community really is. So I'm so appreciating hearing you, because it's not really understood or even recognized, because most of the world is somewhere else. I'll give a quick example. I'll give maybe a couple examples. I taught soccer once, and and I had a winning team at this particular team for the Park League. And I went to the coach of the opposite team before the game and asked him, would you like to trade players, towards the end of the game? And he was so confused by that. And I said, to demonstrate that we're all on the same team, that it's not us against them or them against us. It's not really even about winning. It's about connection and the fun that comes through connection. And basically he said no. And we won that game by one goal, and I was so excited because I joined the world again in that moment. At that moment, it was about winning. And so it's so easy to go into winning versus connection. And my experience with connection is when I'm seen beautiful, no matter what. And that is a practice. That is a practice that a community needs to be aware of. What am I looking at in this person? Am I looking at what's alive in another human being? And when I can see what's alive, what is alive is heavenly born. And those qualities are belonging, being heard, being seen, being celebrated, being supported, knowing that you belong. These are qualities of heaven. I would love to create a church here where we focus on those qualities with each other, that we leave the competitiveness, we leave the mask, and we can be totally vulnerable of what's going on. And so I will share some vulnerability right now. I felt a little sad today because there's so few here, and there's such richness here that we have to offer. And my concern is, because of the world, the way the world is, wouldn't recognize this, because they're so entrenched in that mask. But in my experience, there is so much loneliness living behind that mask. There is so much loneliness in doing what I should do, to man up, to go along, to be tough. And in that loneliness, I lose my strength. I lose my ability to push forward. Then pushing forward becomes work. It becomes a struggle. Getting things done is hard. But when I'm in community and I'm loved and I'm celebrated, life becomes easier. I want to show myself. I want to say, hey, look what I can do. Not only that, but I want to see what you can do, what Virginia can do, and Jack and Luann and everyone here, and the music. In a loving community where it's safe, guess what happens? The soul shows up. We reveal ourselves. And like the prayer, as it is in heaven, becomes manifested here. So thank you.